Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
We are less than 3 weeks to Election Day. It is Thursday morning. Always a bit of a moderate danger zone for the DMZ. You don't know what's going to break, 24 hours from now. But, we do what we can. But I see you're wearing the lucky green shirt, everyone's favorite green shirt.
Yes, for those who don't know, this is a controversial shirt, and in fact, there's a video of me reading mean tweets about it. You can find on YouTube, so check that out.
So if you have another round of mean tweets, it's not. Don't think it's going to dissuade him. He's sticking with it.
The funniest one was somebody said that it looks like a tablecloth. I thought that was kind of funny.
Funny because it's true, but still,
I like the gingham. I'm a fan of the gingham. In fact, I have not done it yet, but I own ginghamgreen.com, and I was thinking about someday if I ever launch the media. Well, now I'm going to call it the M word, but originally it was going to be called Gingham Green Productions to go with the shirt.
Very
so this
nice.
shirt is a big deal.
Exciting.
Gingham Green Media, something like that.
So before Kavanaugh, there's a lot of Democratic energy and momentum. There even was a sense that the blue wave might crest with the Senate, and actually Democrats take over both houses. It became, Bredesen was doing well in Tennessee, Sinema was doing well in Arizona, Beta was even getting close in Texas. Since Kavanaugh, and since other things Democrats have done, we can talk about this in more depth as we go forth. Bredesen's polling seems to have slipped behind Blackburn, though he's still in the mix. Sinema is down to a dead heat with McSally. Beto seems to be, 7 points behind Cruz. And Heitkamp, not only did she take a big risk in voting no on Kavanaugh, she's getting hammered with this ad she ran where she inadvertently outed survivors of sexual assault, who didn't give their consent to that.
That seems like a bad mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I just saw one of the women on CNN saying, "I'm a liberal. I'm not going to vote for her now." So if you lose, if you're going to write off North Dakota, and maybe it's premature to say that, but it doesn't look good. If you write off North Dakota, that means Democrats have to net 3 others, as well as not lose McCaskill in Missouri, not lose Donnelly in Indiana, not lose Scott Nelson in Florida. Tester, I think, is pretty good in Montana, but you still have to be careful about that. So you have to hold all those and to win the blue-purple Republican-held states, Nevada and Arizona. Both of those are dead heats in polling. And pick up one more, Tennessee or Texas. So that hill looks pretty steep right now for Democrats.
I would say insurmountable.
Well,
you never know, but
weird things can happen.
Something weird would have to happen. It's again, we've got 3 weeks. That's a lifetime in politics. So who knows? But man, does it look bad for them
for the Senate. But the House still looks pretty good. You're seeing most of the House projections I've seen, Politico's, Crystal Ball, Cook Political, they're giving the edge to Democrats. I think they have the edge into in the upper teens, and then you got a lot of toss-ups. You got about 25 to 30 straight toss-ups for Republican-held seats. So Democrats will have to win like a third of those to get to 218 in the House.
Yeah.
So it's not a done deal, but it still looks very, very good.
No, I think if you're betting, you bet the Democrats take the House. But the big asterisk here is just how gerrymandered these districts are. And, it's going to be tough. You really need kind of a wave to take the House because it's very possible that Democrats could win the popular vote in the House and not take the House.
Well, there's a counter argument, which is as much as gerrymandering has helped Republicans in the past decade, a little less than a decade, It could be they have spread themselves too thin, which has made them vulnerable to a blue wave.
Right. That's possible. You know, you get a little bit too cute with the map making. You try to create some extra seats. That's obviously the game, right? The game is you want to waste, you know, create these democratic districts where they have all these wasted votes. They just win 80%.
Pack and crack.
Yeah, exactly. And so you get a little too cute with that game, and it could come back to bite you, and that would be possibly what might happen.
So the Senate was always going to be a reach. So is it? You could certainly say Democrats have made certain mistakes in the past couple of weeks, but if the end result is Dems win the House, that's still pretty good, right?
Well, I do think it's a missed opportunity. I think that Democrats, I guess it depends on how you look at it, right? You could look at it and say, hey, the unemployment rate's non-existent. You know, we've got full employment. Things are going pretty good. So Republicans ought to be super popular. I think that's kind of unrealistic. I tend to look at it more this way. I would look at it and say, this should be a huge year for Democrats. They did get dealt a very bad hand in terms of which Senate seats they happen to.
The Senate map is horrible for Democrats.
The Senate map is very bad for them.
You're defending 10 red states, and there's only one blue state Republican and one purple state Republican, so there was always going to be a reach. And look,
but having said that, I do think that Democrats botched the Senate. Like, I think, for example, Heidi Heitkamp could have played her cards differently and could have held on to that seat in North Dakota, and now she's probably going to get crushed. That's just one example.
If she voted for Kavanaugh, do you even have this ad about sexual assault survivors that you screwed up on? Now, that's a mistake. One is a mistake that's just a human error mistake. You know, someone thought they had consent and they didn't. Someone was sloppy. But the mistake of the vote against Kavanaugh...
Someone thought they had consent and they didn't?
I mean, obviously you know what I mean, Matt.
It's just ironic given the topic.
Well, I mean, I think that's why it's being used against her in that way. But the mistake to vote against Kavanaugh is a mistake on principle. I mean, she did that eyes wide open, knowing it's a tough vote for her to take. She clearly felt, I just can't look at myself in the mirror and vote for this guy. This is someone who voted for Gorsuch. So it's not, I mean, and she's trying to use that in her defense. Like, I'm not against conservative judges. I voted for a very conservative judge. I would vote for conservative judges again. I don't believe Kavanaugh, in terms of sexual assault. Now, I don't think it's going to be enough for her to convince folks in North Dakota of that. But I think she knew she was taking a tough vote. And she was doing it as a matter of conscience. So it's an honorable mistake, even if it's a political mistake.
Well, I don't know for sure. I think she missed her window. I don't think her mistake was the vote. I think it was I interviewed a guy named Brian Lundy, who's used to be the executive director of the DNC. He ran Democrats for Bush, and he lives in North Dakota, and I interviewed him about this a few weeks ago. He believes that she had a very narrow window of opportunity to basically come out for Kavanaugh. And as a former attorney general of North Dakota, she could have used that to push back against the attacks and to sort of cloak herself in arguments about due process and the presumption of innocence. And had she done that quickly, in other words, by the time the actual vote came around, the die was cast. At that point, it was actually strategically smart for her to vote against Kavanaugh because she was already probably going to lose. The window had closed. And so now she's thinking about her future. What is Heidi Heitkamp going to do after she loses a Senate race? If she wants to be relevant in the National Democratic Party in the future, there's only one way to vote on Brett Kavanaugh. So I see it as maybe a little less noble than you do, but it's hard to, exactly know her motives.
Well, she's always was a moderate Democrat. She had taken strategic votes that were not party line votes already. And I don't think she was going to have, I don't think she will have any kind of career as like a resistance leader if she loses. I don't know what she wants to do, but the more traditional path would be some kind of paid lobbyist gig. That's what typically happens here. So I don't think
you could see her being like head of the Department of Energy in the next Democratic
but I think she could be that regardless of what vote she took on this one case. So now another race that I think you have some interest in following is Claire McCaskill in Missouri. You've been listening to the New York Times podcast, The Daily.
That's a really good podcast. I think we've recommended it here before.
They had a 2-part series this week about abortion politics within the Missouri Democratic Party because somebody tried to put a plank in the Democratic Party platform, the state platform, that was a welcome note to people who were self-proclaimed pro-life Democrats. That you're essentially saying you're welcome in this party. And it initially passed the platform committee vote, I believe it was. Then the pro-choice faction got very upset, pushed back on it, and then that plank was quickly repealed. And in the course of the podcast series, it was established that Democrats got wiped out at the state level in 2016, which some attributed to abortion politics, in a sense that pro-life Democrats weren't feeling welcome, and that some of the pro-choice activists in Missouri are upset with McCaskill. And McCaskill has I believe, a perfect voting record on pro-choice issues, but she doesn't talk about it vociferously. She tends to avoid questions about it when asked point blank, and even her vote against Kavanaugh, she did not tie it to Roe v. Wade.
She talks about contraception.
Right. And that just struck me. I feel like, one, I don't think I would have written that platform statement the way it was written. I think I would have, if I was in that person's shoes, the pro-life Democrat shoes, I would have negotiated that with pro-choice folks in advance and made it more of try to make a unity statement, not make it kind of an us against them thing. I mean, she seemed to do it kind of on the fly, and I don't think she fully thought it through. By the same token, I think the pro-choice side was overly critical of it because it wasn't saying we should not support pro-choice legislation. It wasn't saying we should go vote for this bill or that bill. It was saying if you call yourself pro-life, you can still be a Democrat, which is symbolic. And there already are people who are pro-life Democrats. We talked about this in the past show. The governor of Louisiana is a pro-life Democrat. Dan Lipinski, congressman from Illinois, he had a tough primary about the subject, but he won the primary. He's still a pro-life Democrat. And these are people who are saying, I'm a pro-life Democrat. I'm not trying to stop pro-choice judges. The woman in the podcast, in the New York Times podcast, who put this platform plank up for a vote is saying, I'm feeling not welcome in my party. She said herself, I'm not trying to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Right.
So they're not even asking for a substantive concession. They're asking for a symbolic welcome note. And so I feel like there was common ground that could have been found with the plank, number one. And number two, you have some pro-choice who are complaining about McCaskill and she's not being vociferous enough about it. She's trying to win an election in Missouri, for Pete's sake. She's voting the way you want to vote. Let her dance around it for a little bit. Who cares? But I don't know if it's actually going to be something that depresses her within her base in Missouri. I mean, she is running neck and neck with Josh Hawley. She has a lot of money. I think she's raised the second most next to Beto for Democratic Senate candidates. But if she does lose, I mean, just based on these on the podcast, you would raise the question: was it that she couldn't get enough swing, or was it that there are some purists in the base that didn't like the fact she didn't talk about abortion enough? And if that's the case, that's kind of nuts.
Yeah. The only thing I would say to that is just to reiterate: people should be listening to that podcast. It's called The Daily. They don't need me to promote them, but I will. And it's funny. I hope they keep it up. Slate also has this great podcast we've talked about called Slow Burn.
Yep.
And I don't know if you heard the last one.
I've not heard the last one yet. I've heard the rest.
Season finale is superb and really raises a lot of questions about Bill Clinton. And I have to say, The Daily and Slow Burn are both liberal mainstream media outlets who are doing a great job with these highly produced podcasts. I think it being even-handed. Like,
maybe these outlets aren't as liberal as you think they are.
If this is what they're doing, if everything that they, I'll put it to you, if everything they did was as high quality and fair as Slow Burn and The Daily, I would be a huge fan and defend them vociferously. And I hope they keep it up. I really do. It's superb.
So just to bring back to the midterms, I know we talked about this a little bit ahead of time, but you think that Democrats in general are risking blowing the midterms because they are saying things that are energizing the Republican base? Yeah,
I think that's basically true. I mean, if you just look at the last few weeks, you had, these are a little bit different examples, but Michael Avenatti arguably helped Brett Kavanaugh get confirmed. Then you had Hillary Clinton and Eric Holder kind of stoke a conversation about mobs and civility, which I think helped create a backlash and an excitement in the Republican base. And now you have Elizabeth Warren, I think, keeping that excitement going. Now, my theory is, and this is just a theory, it could be wrong, but I think it's based on kind of conventional wisdom. The theory is that Democrats are already excited and motivated. So, like, if Trump says something crazy or stupid, that doesn't really impact them because Democrats are already excited. And if you buy the argument that midterms are about exciting and turning out your base, my theory is that anything that nationalizes the race and anything that excites or stokes people actually benefits Republicans right now.
Well, I agree with that last statement. And I wrote my own piece on this subject for Real Clear Politics this past Monday, where I was critical of Holder and Clinton. But we should take those. There's the Avenatti episode with Kavanaugh. There's the Holder and Clinton civility comments, and there's the Warren DNA test. Right? And I think there's sort of three distinct things. I don't agree that because of Avenatti, Kavanaugh is a Supreme Court justice. He was going to be Supreme Court justice anyway. There were 50 Republicans that wanted him to be a Supreme Court justice, and they were going to make him a Supreme Court justice. I think they use Avenatti as an excuse to take the focus off of Dr. Ford, which was much more of a direct accusation against Kavanaugh. You could sort of argue Avenatti made a mistake in promoting a client who wasn't making a direct accusation about Kavanaugh's behavior. She said he was present at what was a gang rape. She didn't say he committed gang rape or was in the room during the gang rape. It was a very vague and fuzzy statement. And so even Susan Collins, she's harping on that in her final speech, which, I mean, it is totally possible that statement was not on the mark, that was vague enough to be meaningless, and that everything Dr. Ford said was totally true and ultimately much more relevant.
Avenatti gave them a straw man, essentially.
Well, potentially. But again, I think that they grabbed onto that as their cover, but I think they were going to push Kavanaugh through either way. Now, what does that mean for Avenatti and for Democrats in general? I think it hurts Avenatti's 2020 hopes, which I think he has. I don't think it necessarily eliminates them, but his brand is not just I'm a fighter, but I'm an effective fighter.
Right.
And so he had.
But you know what these all have in common, of course, though, are Avenatti has 2020 aspirations. Eric Holder has 2020 aspirations. Yes. Elizabeth Warren has 2020 aspirations.
Yes.
And Hillary Clinton, I guess, has an interest in her legacy or something. I'm not sure what she's actually up to. But the point is, all of them have ulterior motives, that their primary motive is not electing Democrats in 2018.
Well, I don't think that's true. I think it's a little overly harsh. I think they do want Democrats to win 2018. I think Hillary certainly wants to be someone the Democrats can turn to help them win elections. She wants to be relevant. I don't think she doesn't care about 2018. And I think her let's go back to Avenatti for a sec. As we said on the past show, and I wrote about in Politico, Avenatti is definitely putting pressure on other Democrats to be confrontational, be aggressive, to be less solicitous of norms and precedents and traditions. And I don't think he's going to stop playing that role. But he undercut himself by taking on a case that had less of a certain outcome. You know, he obviously felt very strong about the Stormy Daniels case, and he has gotten very far with that. He has successfully flipped Michael Cohen. Now, he lost this defamation suit more recently, which is sort of seen as like a double strike. He's not batting 1,000 anymore, but he can still say, look, I flipped Michael Cohen, which was a major development in this legal case. What have these punks done? Nothing. If he was running against the Democratic field, he could say, I did this. What have they done? He can still say that. Holder, I think, was feeling that indirect pressure. Here is someone who wants to run, has expressed interest in running, but has been criticized by the progressive left for not prosecuting Wall Street bankers. So he's not someone who has a lock on any faction of the party and needs to prove his bona fides. So here he's close to the Obamas. In fact, his comments were prefaced by, Michelle is my good friend, but when she said, when they go low, we go high, no, when we go low, we kick them. Which was appropriating when Michael Avenatti said, 2 months ago, when they go low, we hit harder. So he's already trying to copy Avenatti. So I think that definitely had 2020 on the brain and not 2018 on the brain. And Hillary's comments were part of more of a wide-ranging interview. I don't think she was trying to make news with that one comment. I think she was just speaking extemporaneously, but it had the same effect where she sounds like we need to be uncivil because they're being uncivil. Now, both of the Holder and Clinton comments were immediately caveated. Holder said, at the moment, I'm not talking about actual violence. I'm saying we need to be tough and fight for democratic principles. Hillary Clinton said, we don't have to go as far as to be lying, but we should be, pressing Trump on his relationship to Russia and his finances. Those are both points. Whereas when Avenatti said we need to hit harder, he talks about court packing. He's gone as far as to say let's violate this governing norm and political tradition into a more crass power grab. Holder and Clinton were not saying that. They were not saying let's say mean things about people, let's make personal attacks. They were just saying we need to be principled, and in Clinton's case, saying we need to focus on these aspects of Trump. Things that they could have said without saying let's not be civil. By not saying we have to kick them, they could make the same exact point and not say those things. So my argument in my Real Clear Politics column was they were giving Republicans fodder for no good reason. Because the points they're trying to make did not require saying those things. That's the idiocy of it. Now,
we see this in the case of Kyrsten's. Is it Kyrsten Sinema?
Yeah.
In Arizona. I mean, look, I go around the country giving these speeches sometimes to the national aeronautics wholesalers of whatever. You're in some conference room and you have a shtick and you try to be funny. And she had this shtick
when she wasn't in U.S. Congress. I think she was a state legislator to that point. She was speaking at a Texas Stonewall Club event, so it's a liberal group.
Obviously, she had these laugh lines where she would talk about, they say states are the laboratories of democracy. Well, my state's the meth lab of democracy. These, like, we need these lines, okay?
And just to give a little extra context, this is when Arizona was pushing some very harsh anti-immigration legislation. So she was reacting to that stuff. So,
but I in a way, I sympathize with the plight of someone who, like, has to be funny. You say things, I mean, Donald Trump does this all the time. He's in front of an audience. He wants to get them involved. He wants to excite them. He wants to get them to laugh. So he's thinking about his immediate audience, the people literally in front of him, and not about the secondary audience, the millions of people watching him on TV. And I think probably Holder and certainly Holder's guilty of this. I think Sinema's guilty of this, which is you're kind of playing to the crowd a little bit. And you need that line that's like provocative, controversial, or funny to get the crowd to sort of laugh and to kind of win them over. But it doesn't always translate well, and it doesn't always age very well.
Well, the Sinema case is very interesting. So she's running for Senate in Arizona against Martha McSally. Polls now show a very close race, dead heat race. So Sinema is somebody who, during the Bush administration, was very left-wing. She might have even ran for as a Green Party at one point, or identified as Green Party.
Sounds vaguely familiar.
So it got dug up recently. She was doing some libertarian radio show where the libertarian says, "What if I go fight for the Taliban?" She says, "I don't care." It could very well have just been sort of a glib comment, not like I encourage you to go fight for the Taliban. Right. But she was operating in a very left, very anti-war, very anti-Bush zone. So there's that, and as McSally and other Republicans have pointed out, she when I was fighting for America, she was protesting in a pink tutu. Now McSally kind of conflates. It seems to suggest that that Sinema was protesting the Afghanistan war, when the pink tutu protest was protesting the Iraq war. But she was definitely operating as an anti-war activist at that time. Then she's in the state legislature, and as the clips from the Texas event show, she's still being very liberal and being very critical of Republicans. As a U.S. Congresswoman, she's been very centrist, very moderate. She voted against the Iran deal. So she is not someone who, and she's styling herself in this race as a centrist, independent, bipartisan problem solver. And in doing so, she is relentlessly on message. I've never seen someone on message in my life. I mean,
let's dispel the notion that Kyrsten Sinema doesn't know exactly what she's doing.
I mean, it's borderline robotic. And
she wants to be laser focused on helping the people of Arizona.
Right. So she had a debate with McSally. McSally at the very end of the debate essentially literally calls her treasonous. And obviously Sinema is prepared for this, and she says, that's the kind of campaign that Martha McSally is running, but I'm laser focused on what matters to Arizonans and economics and blah, 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 blah. So, does that work? I'm not saying it overworks where it doesn't work. But it's a very interesting test case. Can someone recalibrate ideologically so long as they do it, with 100% consistency, perhaps soullessly, perhaps robotically, but someone could, if you're just mad enough at Republicans and mad enough at Trump, then maybe you just don't care.
Well, the good news for her is she doesn't seem or look like a radical.
Right.
And that means a lot. I mean, that goes a long way. If she looked, and I don't want to be too stereotypical here, but you could imagine the sort of like stereotypical leftist, if she had a different vibe about her, I think she'd be in a lot more trouble. I mean, she's still in this race.
The catch for her is that the clips that they're showing, she does come off that way.
I know,
Now she doesn't. So
she doesn't.
Is it that she's a phony, or is it that she's evolved and this is who you're getting now? And I can't speak for what the Arizona electorate's going to say.
And by the way, when were these clips from? We're talking mid 2000s.
Yeah. Well, I think the Texas ones are a little later.
So that's an interesting point too. I mean, what were you and I doing or saying in 2001? You know what I mean? Like, is it fit? We talked about Brett Kavanaugh possibly allegedly having done something 46 years ago or however 30, I forget how many years it was. But like, even if you just go back 15 years, is it, now look, if you're 70 years old, and 15 years ago you were 55, that's a little different. But Sinema could have argued that she was like this young liberal activist who got caught up in these ideas, she's matured. And
I could be mistaken. I'm not aware for making the "I've matured" argument.
I think she's trying to
just blow past it. This is who I am. This is who I am now.
But I'm saying, for me, I'm just trying to I'm trying to find a way to play devil's advocate for her, which is to say, is it fair to judge? I mean, I don't know how old she is, but she looks pretty young. She would have presumably been quite young as a left-wing activist in the early 2000s. Is it actually fair to? I mean, that's what we do in politics. I mean, politics does hold people accountable for fair or not for things like grocery store scanners, or how you spell the word potato, or whether or not you ever hugged Joe Lieberman.
Well, the bottom line, I think, is for Sinema. I mean, if she's a true phony, is she conning you? And when she gets there to the Senate, she's going to vote like a left-wing radical. I would think the evidence is, based on her voting record in the U.S. House, that she's not going to do that. Maybe it is a total phony bit, but it's a phony bit that's resulting in votes that are generally Democratic, but with some, moderate, with the occasional moderate to conservative vote. So if you're a Democrat in Arizona, the logical choice would be, she's going to be better than McSally, so why would I abandon it? Why vote Green or vote Republican? If this is the best I'm going to get in Arizona, I'm going to take it. If you're an independent swing voter, you have to decide that I would think if you were inclined to like Sinema's U.S. House voting record, the safe assumption is that she's going to continue to vote in that way. That's a more that is the stronger predictor for how she will behave as a senator than what she did as a younger protester. Even if she really believes what she said as a younger protester, she hasn't behaved that way as a professional U.S. federal office holder.
I would just say I think this is another example of where Republicans really got lucky / were smart. I mean, they could have nominated Joe Arpaio for this
or
seat.
Kelly
they
Ward.
Or even worse, Kelly Ward. And then, maybe not worse, but you know what I'm saying. It's a lateral move.
Right.
And yet they nominated McSally, who seems like a great candidate. And this is a very competitive race. And I think Republicans have a pretty good shot of holding on to this seat. And this could have been a Democratic route. I mean, this could have been an easy pickup for them. It's going to be a highly competitive race, I think. And another example, I think, of where Republicans this year kind of got lucky. I mean, West Virginia is the one kind of missed opportunity. I attribute that.
Maybe Montana.
Yeah, it's so funny. So much of this has to do with believability and temperament, right? Tester and Manchin seem like regular guys that would live in Montana and West Virginia.
Well, I mean, they actually are. I mean, they're not imports.
No, they're not. But I mean, like, there are a lot of
and the Republicans in both those races are imports. They're not, state born and bred.
No, okay, fair point. But there are a lot of politicians, and maybe that's an important point. Actually, that's a valid point. But there are homegrown politicians who are not carpetbaggers who feel like phonies. Mm-hmm. And Manchin, even though his state has become so Republican and voted for Donald Trump by like 40 points, and he's out of touch politically, at least his party's out of touch with the trend of West Virginia, Manchin doesn't feel like some lefty, cosmopolitan, elite liberal because he's not. Manchin feels like a regular West Virginia dude. And this is like a simplistic, obvious point to make, but you can't really put a price tag on that. It really matters, you know?
Well, that's why it just seems strange to me when I hear people on the outside of these states second-guessing the choices that the senators make. Yeah. Now, you may say, I want you to do X because I want you to do what I want you to do. I want you to support my positions. I mean, you're welcome to make the case. You're welcome to be angry that they don't vote the way you want them to. I mean, you have that right, obviously. I don't understand someone outside the state arguing, you should have voted my way because it's going to help you politically in your state. Yeah. There's no way you have a better understanding of that person's state electorate being outside of the state. If you're in the state, maybe you do. Joe Donnelly in Indiana, he has an ad out there where he says, the narrator says, socialized medicine. Socialists want government to take over healthcare. And then Joe Donnelly says, over my dead body. And someone commented to me, because I tweeted out, someone commented, is he trying to get Democrats to stay home? Maybe. I mean, I can't say what the Indiana progressive base is going to do. Maybe it's true he's going to hurt himself with his base. But Joe Donnelly has won statewide Indiana before, and I have not. So I'm going to at least defer to his wisdom on what he thinks is going to work in that state.
You know what, though? I like that, but I still feel like I could have done a better job than Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota. Now, I actually have lived in North Dakota, but just because someone has gotten elected there does not mean they always know the right thing. And I will reserve the right as a commentator to prematurely and give an uneducated opinion on what they are doing wrong. I think some of these people are wily. Look, Claire McCaskill, if Claire McCaskill loses, nobody would have won this. No Democrat could have won this time, right? That's my take on her. I think she is a savvy political operator. Not everyone has the same level of political sophistication.
Let's shift to Elizabeth Warren. She has gotten a lot of guff for doing the DNA test. She's gotten guff from Republicans who argue this doesn't prove anything. And you got guff from Native Americans who are saying DNA tests shouldn't be used to prove ancestry, so shouldn't be used to prove tribal citizenship. And I'm personally more, I'm not someone who's steeped in Native American issues. I apologize if I'm being insensitive here. I don't mean to be. Native Americans obviously have every right to determine their own tribal citizenship, which Warren also agrees with. Warren says in the video, I am not arguing that this amounts to tribal citizenship. She said, I'm just trying to back up my family oral history. And now, as a political matter, you could argue, well, she should have known. She knew that much. She knew to say that much. She should have known what kind of reaction this was going to attract from Native American groups, and therefore it's not worth the agita you're going to get from it. I don't know if they were blindsided by that. They might have said, look, we know that's going to come, but we want this issue off the table as much as possible before we do the presidential rollout, which is obviously coming.
Right.
And so
that seemed like a defense. So I agree with everything you've said. I think that was their calculation. That was their strategy. It feels like a very defensive and stupid move to me to do this.
Well, it's obviously defensive. It's literally defensive.
It literally is defensive. It's preemptive defensive. It seems like you're operating from a position of weakness to prove something that's kind of absurd to begin with.
Well, this happened to John Kerry. You know, people get mad at John Kerry for the Swift boat stuff. And people were demanding, well, why don't you release the private, medical records from your Vietnam service and prove that you'd earned these medals? And Kerry said, I'm not going to do that. There's no way. This is just a never-ending process. You give them one thing, they're going to pick at it and nitpick it, and what's the point?
No, but I think John Kerry actually probably did win the medals. And
well, right.
Elizabeth Warren's claim to Native American ancestry
Well, Obama
is
was really born in the U.S., but you put out the birth certificate and people still say, people still come with conspiracy theories.
But Obama waited a long, long time to put that out. And I think he trolled people trying to drive conservative. Don't get me wrong. I think the birther thing was horrible and really damaging. And it was a horrible conspiracy theory. I actually think Obama liked driving conservatives and Republicans crazy. And I think that contributed to the rise of Donald Trump and to the insanity that happened on the right. I think that he liked stoking that.
I think he was – I think his explicit irritation was genuine. I mean, it was something that was getting in the way of him having the spotlight to talk about other issues, which he needed. I mean, Obama was a president that actually wanted to accomplish things, and often would need to have the bully pulpit to do that. And so if you're talking about birther stuff, then you can't do that stuff. So I think that was actually getting in his way, and he was bugged by it. But my point here is that there's no perfect way to deal with these sorts of things. There's ups and downs either way, and I'm not going to predict that Warren is going to handle this expertly, but it is possible that when the announcement comes in November or December, we will be talking more about whatever is in that speech and that announcement video, and less about her Native American ancestry, because as messy as this was, she got out of the way.
That could be, even assuming that's true, and I think it's debatable, and we won't even know till it happens. What she did do, if you set aside the mockery that has ensued on her, what she has done is take up 2 or 3 news cycles, probably, which could potentially have done some sort of damage to Democrats who in just 3 weeks will be up for re-election or up for election.
And I think there's some Democratic teeth grinding about that. I mean, this is obviously not a 2018 decision. This is a 2020 decision. If she was planning to make a presidential announcement in March of 2019, you could do this in December 2018. I assume this means the announcement is going to be in November or December 2019, maybe January.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there would be no point in doing this right now. So I think that's legitimate criticism. I think it's less fair to knock her for doing it at all, because I think she was being sensitive to the tribal citizenship issue. One of the criticisms she got from the Cherokee Nation was that she didn't use DNA samples that were known to be Native American. They were known to be indigenous somewhere in the Americas, but they didn't know if it was actually in the U.S. of A. But that's because the tribes have withheld the DNA because they don't believe in these DNA tests at all, which is their right. It is absolutely their right to do that. But
there's no doubt, man. They twisted the knife in her. I mean, she was already... So the story broke, I forget what day it was. It broke in the morning. Immediately, the press believed her story, and they were reporting it as like, hey, Elizabeth Warren proves that she's got Native American. Then it started to turn during the day, and she was starting to get mocked. And then, man, around close of business time, the Cherokee Nation just put that knife in her, and then they twisted it with glee. And it was devastating. And here's the thing. I'm not I don't know why they're mad at her. I don't know but I don't know why they did that to her, because they really, it was a coup de grace. But shouldn't she have thought about that? Shouldn't she have again, I know that she attempted to preempt that in her video, but she, like, I don't think you bring that up unless you know the Cherokee Nation's going to stand behind you, or at least not do what they did.
Yeah, right. I don't know if they anticipated it or if they were blindsided by it. Clearly, Warren's been trying to take this controversy and turn it into a positive and saying, not only am I going to fight Donald Trump about his personal attacks on me and my family, but I want to use this to lift up Native Americans in general and fight for their causes. And I'm not steeped in these issues, so forgive me if I'm saying something that doesn't fully capture what I have read in recent days. I listened to the Chuck Hoskins Jr. interview on NPR. He's the Secretary of State of the Cherokee Nation. He put out the statement. His father is an Oklahoma Democratic legislature, so it's not like this is some sort of Republican hit job as far as I can tell. I also read an article from a Native American who wrote for Splinter, which went, I think, even deeper than the Hoskin interview went. So what I gather from that is, one, there's this fundamental opposition to using DNA at all to determine Native American ancestry. They want it to be based more on documentation and participation in Native American culture going back generations. That's more, to them, more credible than a DNA test. And I have no dispute with that. What it was befuddling me when I first saw the Cherokee Nation statement was, why are you kicking Warren in the teeth? She clearly wants to be your ally. I haven't heard any politician of any sort talk about these issues as much as she of that prominence. Obviously, I'm sure there are individuals in Congress that do. But here's someone running for president saying, "I'm going to elevate your issues on the presidential level." Why do you want to get on her bad side? And the Splinter essay was rooted in this deep pessimism and cynicism. This is just another white politician, doing a drive-by who's going to sound like they're going to work on our behalf, but she's just using this glint of DNA to help herself.
It's by definition cultural appropriation. Which I'm fine with, actually. I think cultural appropriation is a good thing. But a lot of people on the left think that you shouldn't own a taco stand or a burrito stand if you're white, that yoga is cultural appropriation. And yet we have Elizabeth Warren and Beto O'Rourke, who are doing exactly this. So I think there's some cognitive dissonance and some hypocrisy. And I think that this goes to the Andrew Breitbart theory of basically making liberals operate according to their own standards that they have established. I think that's part of the backstory here. Also, Donald Trump, for better or worse, really drives people crazy. And I think that it's going to be a test to see who can stand up to him, right? That's what Michael Avenatti's entire raison d'etre is. He's the only guy who can go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump. I think Elizabeth Warren has kind of proven that she can't. If this was a test, she failed that test. Donald Trump trolled her. He got under her skin. And look, maybe this is only round one, but I think it's a knockout in round one.
Well, I agree in round one. This doesn't help her make the case that she is the person to go toe-to-toe. Whereas, in 2016, people were like, look at her tweets against Trump. Man, she's really throwing those roundhouses. This doesn't help her make that argument. This makes it seem like she got boxed in. I want to say one more thing on this, but we need to wrap up soon, largely because my battery is going to run out on my laptop.
That's as good of an excuse as any, Bill.
But look, I'm not a Mark Lilla liberal. I'm not someone who says, "Oh, identity politics is ruining the Democratic Party. They need to shut up and just get with the program." I think that's way too oversimplified. The Democratic Party is a diverse party, and it needs to remain. And if it can't reflect that diversity in its politics, they're not going to get their people to turn out. So I think it's way too easy at the same time, you got to win white working class voters in places. So there's tension in there and balance that you have to worry about. But I will say this: if you think Warren is the only person in the Democratic field who's going to get caught up in these sorts of issues over the next potentially 20 months of a Democratic presidential primary, I think you're kidding yourself. This is going to be an incredibly fraught and complicated terrain for Democrats to operate on. It's going to be the most diverse field, the most non-white candidates, the most women candidates, and an electorate that's very energized around these issues. And it's going to be very easy for any of these Democrats to make a misstep here. And every time they do make a misstep, the Mark Lillas of the world and the conservatives are going to say, man, these Democrats are being completely consumed by identity politics and it's killing them. And they
the Mark Lillas and the Matt Lewises.
Right. So I don't want to argue that means Democrats should not talk about diversity ever again, because I think that's not a feasible solution. But it's going to be really, really complicated. And so Warren might seem like, man, she's the worst at this.
Yeah.
I think she's going to be joined by many other Democrats soon enough.
I agree with you. I could add to that, but I think we've given the public what they need. Like, this is already an A+ episode, so we'll just keep them wanting more.
So before my battery goes to zero, quick plug here. I got a gangbuster trio of New Books in Politics podcasts that have gone up. We have Steve Kornacki about his book Red and the Blue.
Great episode, by the way. I listened to that one.
Thank you very much.
I love the stuff about what would have happened if, different people would have won, sort of the revisionist history of the 90s, like if things had played out differently. Well, if Mario Cuomo wins the nomination instead of Bill Clinton.
Right. Well, I said to Kornacki in advance, like, I know you've done a lot of interviews. What have you not gotten a chance to go deep into? And he was like, oh, Cuomo. And I was like, let's do it.
Smart idea.
And I used to intern for Cuomo. I got a Cuomo fascination, so I was happy to do that. Your friend David Petrusha has a fantastic book, TR's Last War, about the last years of Teddy Roosevelt. We had a wonderful conversation about how he impacted the Republican Party and how he impacted World War I, and his controversial theory that Teddy Roosevelt might have killed himself, which has gotten his book banned from a National Park Service site, the Teddy Roosevelt birthplace site.
Get that book, people, TR's Last War. David Petrusha, friend of the show.
And also, last but not least, my interview with right over here, I'm sorry, Michael Konsowitz, They Said No to Nixon. Really excellent book about Republicans who thwarted Nixon's abuses of power, and not just about Watergate, about abusing the IRS, penalizing MIT. Really interesting stuff in there, and a really good conversation. So those three are up at New Books and Politics at the newbooksnetwork.com.
I interviewed Dan Flynn, who has a great new book out about Jonestown and Harvey Milk. We're going to have the 40th anniversary next month of the mass suicide / massacre in Jonestown and the assassination of Harvey Milk. Check that out. We talked for an hour. I learned a lot, including, I don't know if you knew this, Dan Quayle could have very easily have been killed in Jonestown. Leo Ryan, the congressman who went down there and got killed in Guyana, wanted Dan Quayle to come along with him, and Quayle's wife was 8 months pregnant, and so he didn't go.
Wow.
That was one of the many weird random things I learned that I didn't know about.
That whole story is just bonkers. So
a ton of yeah. Also, I'm talking to Greg Sargent today from the Plumb Line.
I'm trying to line him up for next week.
I'll put in a good word. He's going to come by. He's going to be right here in studio. We're going to tape a podcast today. So.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. So before my battery goes to zero, I will say adieu. Till next week.
See you guys. Thanks.